Yes, sir.
All right. We are now reconvening the hearing for Council Bill 19-0410, the Baltimore City Trauma Responsive Care Act. The committee held a hearing on September 5th and a work session on November 21st. In addition to these two meetings, the committee has voted favorably on proposed amendments submitted by Councilmember Cohen. With that, I'll turn it over to the primary sponsor bill, Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for continuing to steward this bill through the Health Committee. Thank you also to my colleagues for co-sponsoring it. The Trauma Responsive Care Act began well over a year ago when we experienced a mass shooting in our district. 4 people were shot right next to a playground right after school had dismissed for the day. And so we saw children, families, people walking around while gunshots were pouring down. 4 people ended up shot, 2 of them critically wounded. 38 bullets were fired. In any other place, they would call it a mass shooting, but here in Baltimore, the reaction was almost none. And when I visited one of the schools the next day, there really wasn't any additional intervention. There were no crisis response teams. There were no clinicians there to support the children. There was nothing. And what we know about trauma is that if left untreated, it gets worse. And it creates health challenges, lifelong health challenges for children. It leads to a further cycle of violence. Young people that witness violence and don't receive any support are themselves likely to eventually become victims or perpetrators unless we intervene. They're also likely to have long-term poor health outcomes. They're also more likely to become substance use disordered, addiction. These are some of the symptoms of untreated trauma. And yet, as a city, we have too often lurched between different policing strategies, different police commissioners, as if the police can solve all of our problems. The answer is not turning to one single agency, one department, which, by the way, isn't even controlled by the city of Baltimore. The answer is us. We have to heal ourselves. And I've been proud that since introducing this bill, we've seen a real movement for healing across Baltimore, and several of the people that are in the chamber today have been integral in that movement, because we know that when we pass the Trauma Responsive Care Act, it can't stop there. This has to be about responding, preventing, and healing from trauma in all of our city. And that's why it's been so gratifying to see educators, nonprofit leaders, barbers, all different types of healers, clinicians, doctors, pediatricians coming together to say enough is enough. We need to be the ones to heal us. We cannot rely on someone else to do this work for us. And so we've been just incredibly moved by the outpouring of support. There have been hundreds-ish of conversations in classrooms, in barbershops, all over Baltimore about what we can do to heal from this disease that is trauma. And it's been really inspiring and moving for me as the sponsor of the bill to see the response and to see the many, many people across agencies, across silos, across city government, and in community that have joined together to support this work. I want to just close by reading a quick email that I received this morning. This is from a woman named Anise Brown. She said, "Hello, Councilman Mr. Cohen. I saw a news broadcast regarding your proposed trauma bill. I'm from East Baltimore and am now a prosecutor for Baltimore City. Like most African American women from East Baltimore, I experienced a number of adverse childhood experiences, most of which I still struggle with today. I would love to assist in your effort to get this bill passed. I strongly believe it would significantly cut crime in Baltimore to have mental health issues like post-traumatic stress disorder addressed in early childhood stages." This is from a prosecutor, someone who is charged with dealing with crime and violent crime in our city. People get it. People understand that all of us, have a role to play in not just arresting our way out of our crime problem, but in preventing it and in short-circuiting the cycle of violence before it starts. When you have a prosecutor joining in to say, now is the time to try to impact post-traumatic stress and deal with this disease head on, you know now is the right time for this legislation. So with that, again, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your support, and I look forward to what I hope to be the final of 3 hearings we've had on this legislation, and to move this bill forward.
Thank you. With that, we are going to move for agency. Any response back from agency? I know there's been amendments. Any additional feedback from health, law, DPW? I see transportation has just joined us. Finance, housing. There's some proposed amendments.
Hi, good morning. Stephanie Murdoch from the Department of Housing and Community Development. Councilman Cohen has graciously allowed the department to be a member on the task force, so we're here today with an amendment drafted by legislative reference. Essentially, what we'd like to do is rescind the previously adopted amendment number 3 and place it with an amendment to allow a representative from the Department of Housing to sit on the task force.
Any questions from the committee? Okay. So we are waiting on one more member of the committee to join us. So I'm going to hold the vote on the amendments until the conclusion of the hearing. I do know that there are members of the public who have signed up to testify, so we're going to go to public testimony before moving forward on anything. And if anyone has not signed up to testify, please do, if you'd like to. Okay, first up we have Robin Ortiz. Please state your name and speak clearly into the mic. It is being televised.
Hi, my name is Robin Ortiz. I'm a physician trained at Hopkins, now working at Penn on policy research. Thank you for your time. So thank you, members of the committee. As a physician for adults and children trained here at Hopkins, I stand before you on behalf of the patients I've learned from. From Carlos, a 6-year-old presenting with developmental regression after crossing the border alone to join his mother in Baltimore, who taught me not to reflexively just refer to city services, but to ask why, and to get his family engaged in trauma-informed immigration care. To Mr. S., who nearly left clinic after a closed exam room door reminded him of the prison cell he was just released from, who taught me to ask permission to create safe spaces. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are traumatic events that include abuse, mental illness in the home, loss of a parent, etc. Such trauma is disproportionately experienced in communities facing economic hardship, violence, and exposure to the criminal justice system. A landmark public health study demonstrated that exposure to these ACEs increases the risk not only of mental illness and opioid use up to 12 times, but of diseases like heart disease and cancer, the top 2 leading causes of death in the United States. Increasing number of ACEs carries greater risk, and yet 40% of those in Baltimore have experienced 2 or more ACEs, nearly double national rates. Adults with multiple ACEs are more likely to be physically inactive and sedentary and obese, and over 2 times more likely to die before age 65. This grossly shortened life expectancy is not something we want to come to already low life expectancies we see in parts of Baltimore. I do research that shows that these experiences literally can get into the DNA and are affected in our body's reading and interpreting of it. But the good news is the risk is reversible, and trauma is not a life sentence. We can do something. This act aims to bring recognition and trauma responsiveness across Baltimore. I helped build a curriculum for physicians using this approach and can tell you the evidence suggests trauma-informed approaches increase engagement in education, rehabilitation, and treatment, from schools and clinics to criminal justice systems, for both individuals exposed to trauma and those helping them. So why care if you're not directly working with individuals like Carlos or Mr. S? Well, for one, those with trauma are all around us, or even are us. But additionally, children educated through trauma-informed lenses with social-emotional skills give an $11 return on every dollar invested through lifetime earnings, health, and decreased crime. Beyond investment potential, this ACTS working group will provide metrics and training models that will shape policy well beyond the walls of Baltimore City. Lastly, evidence tells us that the most protective buffer against trauma for all ages is having a supportive relationship, and that grows from a supportive community. So regardless of which reason moves you, I urge you to consider a favorable vote for the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act, as I view it a vote for today's youth, tomorrow's adults, and our journey as healing as a city. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Next, we have Joyce Lombardi.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. Joyce Lombardi, I'm here on behalf of the Baltimore Child Abuse Center, and I'll just tell you a little bit about us. You probably already know this, some things you might not know, and why, a couple reasons why we really urge a favorable report of this bill. And so, as you know, Baltimore Child Abuse Center is the place that deals with the effects of the trauma that adults inflict on our kids, either intentionally through rape and human trafficking or unintentionally, foster care, and witness to violence. And so you know that. We've now partnered with LifeBridge Health, and so that partnership allows us to kind of broaden our scope into comprehensive violence. As you probably know, that it's violence across the lifespan. So it's not just our child abuse model, but it's also the kind of trauma that's inflicted on bodies. Domestic violence, 50% of women before they die come into contact with hospital emergency rooms. So we've got a domestic violence program, we have 2 street violence programs, and we have an elder abuse program. And so this vantage point gives us, we love 2 really important things about this bill. One is it's just a paradigm shift. I mean, what you've done is what Representative Cummings was doing in Congress. There's the RISE Trauma Act. There's trauma-informed. People are really, policymakers like you, are really struggling to take the science of ACEs, adverse childhood experience, and put it into practice, and that's what this bill does. You put trauma first. You put adverse childhood experiences first. And that's huge, right? And in my world, I have a pregnant 6th grader who goes to a hospital, and someone looks at her and says, oh, well, what were you doing? You're fast. Well, no, she's been raped by somebody, but someone doesn't see that first off. So it's a paradigm shift. And so we look at our kids and we say, not what's wrong with you, what happened to you. Same thing when we have people from our hospital-based violence program come into a hospital. They're seen first as perpetrators, not patients. So we really come together, trauma-informed approach, and hook them up with the services that they need all over the city. Could be housing, mental health, and so forth. And I think the other thing that your bill does, which we support, is that you get the service providers and adults to talk to each other. And so we are a child advocacy center. We can't get accredited unless we get everyone at the table. We put the traumatized person in the middle, and then we bring all of the agencies to the kid. That is our model. It's evidence-based. It works. We can't get credited without it. We know that it works. And so this bill is a first step in that, and we think it's great. And I guess on a positive note, Healing City Baltimore, which you've convened, it's been great. It's been great meeting people. You mentioned the barbers, bringing us together, talking to each other, even outside of our service provision. And those of us on the front lines know that kids are resilient, people are resilient. And we know it. We know that bodies heal. We know that eventually with the right services, brains heal. And I think with the right leadership, we think cities can heal as well. So we thank you for bringing this forward and urge a favorable report.
Thank you.
Thank you. My apologies for possibly messing up the last name. Blake Maciel. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Blake Maciel. I'm Regional Manager for Coaching Corps, a nonprofit dedicated to ensuring every child gets to play the sport that they love with a trained and caring individual by recruiting and training volunteers to be youth athletic coaches in the communities around Baltimore City. I'm also an Associate Director for Be More Athletic, a youth middle school athletic league operated by Living Classrooms. I'm very blessed to work with those two associations because I'm a firm believer that sports are vehicles for character development and social mobility, and I have the opportunity to work to increase those opportunities for our young people every day. Over the past 5 to 6 years, working with our partners, we've definitely seen a need to ensure our coaches are not only focused on athletic development, but the growth of the individual athlete. So often we see sports as an escape, but what we have definitely learned in Baltimore City is that our fields and our gyms can be centers for healing as well. And in order to address that, the two organizations that I work for have created trainings that are based upon character development and empathy. And Coaching Corps does that through in-person trainings with our coaches throughout Baltimore City, whereas Living Classrooms does it with our yearly coaches meetings, because our coaches have definitely seen our young people are hurting, and they definitely want to make sure that they have all the tools in the bag that they can possibly have in order to make sure that those young people are set up for success in the future. I'm optimistic seeing this act potentially come to pass because I hope we can continue to pass legislations that actually listens to our young people. And I hope that Baltimore City, like our youth athletic coaches, will promote healing-centered engagement so that we not simply meet our young people where they are, but where they dream as well. I thank you for your time today, and I hope that you vote yes on this.
Thank you. Mark Jews.
Good morning. Thank you for having me and taking this time. Am fortunate enough to continue to work with Councilman Cohen on this, not just Trauma Responsive Care Act, but as well as Healing City, Baltimore. As a native Baltimorean, it's tough to see my city hurt in the manner that it does. Beyond the numbers, and I mean, there's a lot of clinicians and things, we know all these numbers and things, but knowing the actual people behind those numbers is serious. I'm blessed to have navigated my way out of some not so great upbringing and things in neighborhoods and saying some things, but I still have far too many people close to me still back in those situations. So I was fortunate enough to work with a local nonprofit organization for the past 15 years that services young people in foster care. And over those 15 years, we serviced over hundreds of young people, and their trauma is real. It's complex trauma, it's chronic trauma, it's tough, but the work that happens on the ground is necessary. We just need more resources, more people in the same vein and mindset so we can continue to heal our city. So I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for taking this time to hear the testimonies of other Baltimore citizens and other professionals in the area as well, and trying to get this act done and completed. Thank you.
Thank you. Melissa Buckley.
Good morning. I never envisioned myself living in Baltimore, much less standing here in City Hall, sharing my commitment to lifelong partnerships with my neighbors, both known and unknown, regarding partnerships that I know will help to strengthen this special city with the small town feel. So prior to living and working here, the extent of my knowledge of this city was unfortunately based on television and crime statistics. Like many others, I believed the hype. Yet I can tell you now with sincerity that one of the best decisions I have ever made has been to call Baltimore my home. By the way, before I go any further, I just want to say thank you to the council for the November 18th resolution where you referred to Coppin State University as the jewel of West Baltimore. As a faculty member of the Department of Social Work at Coppin State, I cannot tell you how much that meant to me personally, and so I want to thank you for that. So I moved here to Baltimore in May, and I immediately discovered that Baltimore is apparently where all the community activists live. Everybody seemed to be involved in some sort of activism, so I knew that I was right at home. In June, I was lending a hand with other concerned citizens down at the Poe homes for the water crisis. In July, I was participating in neighborhood cleanups. And in August, I attended what I believe was the first of 9 town hall meetings held by Brandon Scott. And it was all downhill from there. I walked away from that meeting with a partnership with Liberty Elementary School, and that partnership continues to blossom. At that meeting, I also met Zeke. I never met a council member who is so down to earth and who literally knows everybody's name. I shared with him that I find myself experiencing anxiety each time I hear the police helicopters flying over my home or when they're driving past my home. That anxiety is definitely a symptom of trauma. I remember saying to him that it seems that many people here are numb to the sounds of the police activity, and we agreed, that is trauma. I am a social worker, and I've been doing trauma-informed work since before it was called trauma-informed work, but I can't tell you how grateful I am for the awareness of Zeke and others like Zeke, and all of you who support this work. I'm grateful for the voices of Brianna and her peers who stood bravely before you all and shared with you what their lived experiences are with regards to trauma. I'm appreciative of the lifelong work and efforts of so many others who have devoted their time to this work and for accepting newcomers like me to this city and allowing me to roll up my sleeves and join in on the work. For the past 2 months, we've been meeting weekly to plan for what we believe will be a catalyst for change that will foster healing. We have no chance of healing individually if we do not join together in this movement for healing. And I do believe that the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act will enable us, well, it will empower us to be able to heal together as a city, as a community, as neighbors, and as families. So I thank you for your time, and I thank you for the continued partnership, and I look forward to continuing to engage in this movement for healing. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next up, we have Shauna Mary Brown.
Good morning, everyone. Hey, my name is Shauna Mary Brown, and I'm a community healer and integrative psychotherapist. I was trained as a clinical social worker, a really, really tired PhD student in the School of Social Work, and a consultant to many of our health and human services and educational institutions here in the city of Baltimore. I'm born and raised here. My grandmama's house was bulldozed for the highway to nowhere. So much of my experience for not only the last 5 years of holding healing space for the institutions in the city, behavioral health, health educations, and like, but also holding healing space for change makers, children, their parents, Black women, and activists in the city of Baltimore around how to help support them, reminding them how they can heal themselves when our organizations fall short. There was a time a couple of years ago where I had the opportunity to hold healing space for a group of 4th and 5th grade girls in a Baltimore City public school on the west side. One of the activities that I had the ability to hold space for them was to give them an opportunity to draw pictures to articulate what stressed them the most. What they drew after they dispersed into the classroom, after we took a pause from our healing circle for them to really be able to express themselves, what all of them drew when they came back into the circle were variations of pictures of guns. Every last one of these girls, it was about 8 of them, after sitting, they weren't talking to each other, but they had this collective, this shared trauma that they did not have the words for, but they knew how to draw it on a piece of paper. And I'm privileged to be able to hold this healing space for our children, and I've heard much, and I am in agreement with all of the testimonies that have been expressed thus forward. However, I think it's really important for us to remember the responsibility of organization and institutional an organizational, institutional acknowledgement of what perpetuates the trauma that our children and families endure. Because I've also had the opportunity to hold healing space for leading organizations in the city of Baltimore when addressing these issues around trauma-responsive care, around tackling tough topics about race and oppression, around really acknowledging what it looks like in practice. There are a few things that I would identify as patterns in our organizations that I would caution us to be chiefly aware of because I'm super confident that this bill is going to pass. And so one of them is that there's this ever-present tension between funding and racial equity. So in the bill, certainly we have outlined the importance of centering training and ensuring that all of our organizations are trained. However, when we're really centering around who is the most qualified, who is centering the value system of the communities being served, and who is also very much so in alignment with and aware of what research says, it's very important for the organizations as this is put forth for us to collectively maintain keen awareness on being sure that we are still holding forward in racial equity in these conversations. Another is an ever-present unacknowledgement of oppressive practices embedded within the institution. That is, most of the research that is done in health and in social work and in education, unfortunately, perpetuates the blaming the victim. That is, not acknowledging that our systems, because we are an institution that is based chiefly in racism and white supremacy, we need to acknowledge and undo that, uproot that, in order to truly ensure that we have a healing city in Baltimore. And the last thing that I really would like to bring forward is that one of my underlying concerns in the execution of this act is treating organizational change as a singular task. We have a pattern of saying, oh my goodness, if I could just make sure that I get this one training on trauma-informed care and this other training on how to not be racist, then we'll all be fine. But really what we're talking about is community and cultural change, a complete shift in the way that we're looking at things. So I implore all of you that will have the responsibility and the excitement to be able to identify who sits on the task force to ensure that the value system, that the vantage points, that the expertise, and that the community rootedness is ever present to ensure that these perspectives are truly upheld. It is important for us to redefine what representation means with those things in mind. And so I think it's really clear. I've had the privilege of being able to support this bill, to be able to support and offer insight on the execution of it, as well as the Healing City event that I'm super excited about. But I had to, in alignment with my favorable vote, also express the importance of us moving forward cautiously and thoughtfully about how to not perpetuate racism and oppression here in the city of Baltimore. So my full support, I'm super excited, and I'm grateful for the work that is happening, has been happening, and will continue to happen. But we must remain clear that we are having these tough conversations in an effort to ensure the healing of our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Christina Duncan Evans.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Christina Duncan Evans, and I am the elected chair of the teacher chapter of the Baltimore Teachers Union. I'm here representing the members of the BTU who endorsed the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act at our fall membership meeting. We stand in support of the bill and urge the committee to report favorably on it because we work with children every day who have experienced adverse childhood experiences. While we work to dismantle the systems that inflict undue trauma on our students, we must acknowledge the impact of that trauma in our classrooms and promote the healing that our young people need. Our job as teachers, paraprofessionals, and school-based clinicians is to help our students grow and develop to their fullest potential. Trauma and a lack of resources to confront it limit what we can do in our schools and make our jobs harder. This bill directs energy, attention, and resources to healing our city, and especially so that our young people can access the educational opportunities that will empower them to join us in creating a new future for our city. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Joshua Turner. And I'll note that Mr. Turner is the last to indicate wanting to testify. Is there anyone else that hasn't signed up? Okay, we'll have you next. Thank you.
Hello again, my name is Joshua Turner. I'm here representing Students Demand Action as well as myself. Before I continue, first I would like to thank Zeke Cohen for actually bringing this issue to the forefront and really addressing the issue of trauma and really looking at why we need to move forward in order to heal. Trauma is an all too familiar word that is synonymous with the Black experience and living in Baltimore. Baltimore has lost countless lives as a result of gun violence. This year alone, we have seen 327 homicides, 291 of them being a result of gun violence. When looking for solutions of this issue, we oftentimes rush too quickly without thinking about how we need to heal first in order to come up with effective solutions. The trauma caused by gun violence and other systemic issues has caused Baltimore to be crippled in a lot of its effectiveness with coming up with solutions for a wide range of issues, whether it be education, gun violence, crime, or et cetera, or even finding a decent way on how to police. A few months back, I was here at a hearing where Breonna Harris from Frederick Douglass High School, also a member of Students Demand Action, expressed and talked about various forms of trauma she has endured resulting from both gun violence and also everyday traumas that occur within her community. What's most troubling is that there are countless of other people in the city that are just like Breonna that might have endured the very same trauma or much more. Without healing, we cannot move forward. Before the passing of Congressman Cummings, he chaired a hearing addressing childhood trauma as a public health crisis. At the hearing, he acknowledged that us, not only as a city, but also as a nation, pays little to no attention on the issue of childhood trauma, as well as trauma that occurs in our everyday communities, and that we need to heal and prevent such trauma. I want to thank Councilman Cohen and his team for working tirelessly to address this issue and supporting the healing of the city of Baltimore. I am a firm believer that this bill will allow us as a city to move to prevent as well as heal forward in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ma'am, if you'd like to come up. And if you could state your name for the record.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Raquel Griffin, and I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator from the Center for Child and Family Traumatic Stress at Kennedy Krieger Institute. Kennedy Krieger recently added my position for the need of the community becoming aware of our center. This center has been open for 35 years and has collaborated with many events and campaigns in the city, including Children's Mental Health Awareness Week campaign. I am hopeful that I could bring more awareness to this center and the need for disseminating the stereotypes of therapy. We have many clinics ranging from treatment supporting community violence, sexual violence, domestic violence, immigration, and more. We have also added adult treatment for the caregivers of our children, clients as well, to help decrease the likelihood of intergenerational trauma. I hope that this bill will support change, encourage healing, and promote collaborations in this city that I have grown to love. I am a resident of Anne Arundel County, and I took the initiative to leave Anne Arundel County and the community work that I was doing to come to a city that may have needed it a lot more. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ryan Turner.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Turner, Executive Director of Community Law and Action here in Baltimore, also known as CLEA. Just a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to testify relating to trauma being a public health issue, which in fact it is. Today I rise in support of the Elijah Cummings Trauma Responsive Care Act. Trauma responsive care is a step in the right direction for our city, particularly our youth. And I believe that the uprising that we experienced just a few years ago was a manifestation of our young people being incessantly ignored. Our young people need to understand and need to know that we are behind them 100%. Our young people need to know that we care for them. Our young people need to know that we hear them. And when they marched and when they demonstrated just a few years ago in the uprising, that was the manifestation of them saying, we need you all to hear us. We live here, we grow here, we develop here, and we need our city to listen to us. If this is our opportunity to stand up for our young people and make the investment in the lives of our young people so that when we are of the age of retirement and when our days are done here, that our young people will pass the torch on and will be able to live, will be able to thrive, will be able to survive, knowing that there were folks that came before them that cared about their success, that cared about their development, and that cared about their growth. The vote for this Trauma Responsive Care Act is a vote in the investment of our young people here in the city of Baltimore. I stand in support. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Come on.
Good morning. My name is Isra Nunez. I am the Center Director for Virginia S. Baker Recreation Center in Patterson Park. I'm here this morning on behalf of our agency, Department of Recreation and Parks for Baltimore City. I had the privilege of meeting Councilman Cohen a few years back at a community meeting in Greektown at the time where I was working not long after a ICE raid had occurred in that community that pretty much overnight had taken two gentlemen that decided to take a trip to Walgreens and never made it home. And as a representative of that community, that was something that struck not just me individually, but that entire population. I represent a district in the Southeast that, as we like to call, lives in the shadows. A very strong group of immigrant families from all over the world. And as a representative of that community, one of the biggest things that we've been grateful for through this conversation that Councilman Cohen has approached us about is allowing those people, our community, to have a seat at the table. And so on behalf of Rec and Parks, we have extensive and substantial support for this bill on three major grounds. I'm going to touch those really quickly. I won't go into a whole monologue for all of you this morning. But there are three main grounds that we do offer our support for this bill, the first of which being the portion of the bill that requires mandatory training for government agencies. We do feel as an agency that that's something that would work in our best interest for best practices. As I said before, we consider ourselves to be the front lines. You may not, a lot of the children that live in our city, a lot of the families in our city experience widespread trauma across the board. And while most of them you may not see in a therapist's office, or you may not see in a counselor's office, or you may not see in a clinical setting, you will find them in schools. You will find them in recreation centers. We see them every day. We serve them every day. They come through our doors, and so we want to be equipped to serve those communities, those individuals well, and we feel that this training would help support our ability to do that, and it also will support our staff, who, quite frankly, aren't clinicians, aren't professionals, aren't people that are well-versed in the process of serving trauma and offering support and repair, and nonetheless, they do the best they can. But it allows them the opportunity as well to get resources to help themselves, to better themselves, and also to support those, as we say, the caretakers, that there can be care for the caretakers as well. So we support on those grounds. We also support the notion of the task force involvement on behalf of Recreation and Parks. As I said before, we feel it's vital that those who don't have a voice have the opportunity to have one. And so and as seeing as though Recreation represents 43 different districts across the city, we definitely feel that it's important to have representation for every community in our city, every group in our city, everyone that has a story to tell, that has an interest in becoming a better person. As it relates to trauma and having the resources that they need, we feel that it's important for us to be able to have to advocate for them. And so we definitely feel that portion is vital as well. And third and finally, we also believe that any specific information, trainings, things that are done on behalf of this bill that would help to translate to the best practices of our agency are important. And I think any agency should feel that way as well. If there are things that we can do better, we want to do them. If there are practices that we can adopt that may not necessarily be the best, we want to know what they are, because our job is to serve the city, and we want to do it well. And we feel that this is a step in doing that as well. So thank you.
Thank you. There being no other testimony, know that there are two additional amendments to this legislation that are being introduced by, on behalf of Councilmember Cohen. Do you want to speak to these two additional amendments for the committee?
Sure. And let me just also briefly respond and thank all the folks who came forth to testify today and who have been part of this Healing City process, as well as the agencies that are here today. Particularly thank you to the Health Department for their partnership in this legislation, but all the agencies have been tremendous, as well as the Department of Legislative Reference, who have, thanks Tony, helped to construct the language within this bill. Before touching on the amendments, quickly, just want to lift up three things that I heard in some of the testimony. One is an acknowledgement that in order to short circuit the cycle of violence in our city, we need to address the root cause. And part of that root cause is the trauma that so many people, and so many young people in particular, endure. That there is not a policing strategy out there, there is not a mass incarceration strategy that is going to accomplish the goal of creating a city that is well, and that everyone is safe, and that everyone is respected, and that every person can survive and thrive within Baltimore, that it is going to take a joint collective effort across Baltimore. Two is that healing needs to happen, and again, thank you, Israel, for your work in the rec center. Healing needs to happen in non-traditional spaces, not just hospitals, but in rec centers, in libraries, in barbershops. I've been inspired by the ceasefire movement and their tireless effort for peace across our city. And it is going to take doing this work in places that are not comfortable for clinicians or for folks who have traditionally done mental health work. It's going to take healing spaces in laundromats and in barbershops and in libraries and all across Baltimore. And then finally, to lift up some of Shauna's testimony, part of this bill is a tacit acknowledgement that much of the trauma that's been inflicted in Baltimore and in other places has been inflicted by government. Government is the manifestation of the collective will of the public, and too often in this city, that collective will has been to enact harsher sentences, to enact policies that have not served the people here, to not acknowledge the role that racism and white supremacy and other forms of discrimination have played in shaping a city that is deeply unequal. That is why in the last hearing we pushed to have several folks who center equity in their work serving on the task force. That is also why part of this bill calls on every city agency to fully review their policies, their practices, and their procedures with a lens toward reducing re-traumatization, because government itself has to do the work in healing, and that means having difficult and often painful conversations about our role in shaping Baltimore in the way it looks right now. With that, there are two additional amendments. There have been many. One is from the Department of Housing, essentially asking for a representative of DHCD to be on the task force. And I support this amendment because so much of how trauma is perpetuated in Baltimore is a function of housing discrimination, of housing instability, of young people who are either unhoused and houseless or are housing insecure and are spending time on someone's couch or traveling to someone else's bed temporarily. And so we think it's really important for housing where someone stays and lives, where someone considers their home, to be part of this conversation. And so I'm glad to include the department on the task force and to really partner with them directly in making sure housing instability does not continue to cause vast amounts of harm and trauma to children and families. That's the First Amendment. The Second Amendment is really a technical amendment. We passed it in the last hearing, but it essentially makes sure that the chair of the Youth and Education Committee is an ex officio member of the task force. And so those are the two amendments before us today, and I would appreciate my colleagues' support in supporting both.
So moved.
Second. All right.
So do I get to make that motion or second?
So it was moved by Councilmember Clark, second by Councilmember Reisinger. As the chair, I'm a yes. Councilmember Henry is absent. Councilmember Clark?
Yes.
Councilmember Reisinger?
Yes.
Councilmember Slifer?
Yes.
Okay. So the First Amendment passes. Is there a motion to move amendment number 2?
So
Oh, that was both of them?
Yes, both of
Oh.
them combined.
Okay.
So moved.
Sorry, hold on 1 second. Okay, so we're good on the amendments? On the bill?
Right now, the bill.
Yeah, is there a motion to move the bill as amended?
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved by Councilmember Clark, second by Councilmember Reisinger. I am a yes. Councilmember Henry is absent. Councilmember Clark?
Yes.
Councilmember Reisinger?
Yes.
Councilmember Slifer?
Yes.
Okay. All right, the bill, there we go, sorry. The bill is favorable. The bill will be placed on second reader on Monday, January 13th, 2020. This hearing is concluded. I do ask that the committee stay because we need to vote on the tobacco bill. 1 second. Yep. All right, thank you. Okay. So we're going to recess this or reconvene the hearing for Bill 19-0476, tobacco distribution, conforming and modifications.